the third day of October 2022. I'm your host, Dana Durnford. I'm also known as Nuclear Proctologist.org. You can call into the show 709-589-4406, and it's the Nuclear Scumbag Show. We call it the Nuclear Scumbag Show because it's obvious that's what you end up with when you talk about the nuclear industry. Once you start diving into that topic, oh goodness, where do we even start? Well, you got a major story out of Australia we're going to start off with. We got a poll for everybody tonight. These 14 prefectures, one of them, Chiba, is 20 miles away from Tokyo. It's 200 kilometers from the nuclear meltdowns. 14 prefectures were banned by 55 countries. Earlier this year, just a few months ago, before Boris Johnson was chased out of Downing Street for scandal after scandal after scandal, with a handshake, he removed all restrictions from the radioactive prefectures. Radiation is not going to go away for several million years. And the industry, nuclear industry, has been growing food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation in a no-go zone for sale. It just doesn't even seem real, does it? And so we have a poll tonight. Should former Prime Minister, I didn't have enough room to put former in there, should former Prime Minister and criminal Boris Johnson be arrested for removing the radioactive Fukushima food ban for the United Kingdom? The second vote was no. That when I posted this, the industry is ruthless to import food from a nuclear wasteland into all your supermarkets and shops and school cafeterias. It just absolutely defies something like that could happen. Nuclear, this is a crazy story. This is Montebello Island, which is off the coastline. It's about 250 islands. They irradiated it so bad you can only spend an hour there, which means you can't go there. You're not supposed... When they say it's so radioactive you shouldn't spend more than an hour, it means you're not supposed to be there, because radiation is airborne. And you ingest it and sequester it in your muscles, your organs, your bones. Your body immediately attacks it. And so all the species that are there, that's what's happening to them. The body attacks it with white blood cells and other ways. And that means the victim has less red blood cells, because you have to displace red blood cells, produce white blood cells. It's permanent. So it's not like a cut on your hand and everything goes back to normal 7 days later. This is forever. And the more you get in you, the more white blood cells you produce, or insects or animals or birds or any species in marine life. And people have been going out there. This is where United Kingdom had went to Australia to test their nuclear weapons. They waited for the wind to blow across Australia, and then they set off their nuclear weapons. They also done over 700 dirty bombs in Australia. There was, because mostly people only hear of Montebello, Maralinga, and Emu as nuclear bomb areas. They don't think about 700 conventional dirty bombs where they took uranium fission products and plutonium, among others, but quite a lot of that, wrapped it in conventional explosives and detonated it. What a horrible thing to do. Now, the legacy of the nuclear industry, of course, is the Americans, among other places, went to Bikini Atoll. The French went to the French Polynesian Islands. Britain, Christmas Island, Maralinga Island. These are the rare, extremely rare and extraordinary paradises on our planet pre-nuclear age. So these were totally isolated, like inconceivable, beautiful places. And the nuclear industry destroyed all of them by the 70s, permanently, as you'll see coming up. Radiation risk nuclear threat discovered off Western Australia coastline. Off Western Australia coastline. My apologies. People want to visit one Australian tourist destination are warned not to spend more than an hour there due to elevated radiation levels from nuclear bombs. It's a tourist destination. So how many people over the last couple of decades spent more than an hour? Because you're talking about a place way off the coastline. You're not just going to go all the way out there and spend an hour there. They're going to go on the islands. The nuclear industry is just... I understand originally there's secrecy, you know, and the big bomb and everything else that goes with this. But that's where it was supposed to stop. It's still not acceptable what they done, but that's where it was supposed to stop. All the industry done was continue to get eviler. And now the current generation in the nuclear industry are considered the untouchables. There's no incentive not to be evil, and they are taking advantage of it. 70 years after Montebello was used as a nuclear test site, which is 120 kilometers off the coastline, marine scientists discovered there remains a radiation risk to marine life and tourists. Due to the elevated radiation levels, visitors are currently encouraged to keep their trips to an hour a day. So how many people is going to travel 120 kilometers off the coastline and spend an hour? They're not supposed to be there, and this was well known by the nuclear industry. It's exceptional that this particular story had ever reached the population. It's extraordinary. There are so many Montebello scenarios on this planet, like I explained to you. Christmas Island, the French Polynesians, they radiated everybody in the French Polynesians. 250 low-lying islands and islets covering 60,000 hectares. This is paradise that was destroyed permanently. And these are the nurseries for the ocean we're talking about, by the way. Operation Hurricane was the first time an atomic bomb was tested by the British in other people's country, when the site chosen due to its isolated location and the Australians' close ties with the UK, which Australia was a prison continent, right? For the white population, the Anglo-Saxon. The British sent them there as prisoners and released them to go there and die in a so-called drought, right? In the deserts, and it was considered a terrible way to die, but it turned out it's quite the paradise. Unfortunately, studies saw more than 100 samples of sediment, marine life collected and tested. Has done a 4-year of testing as part of the first of its kind study. She's not looking for plutonium or uranium fission products or any of the long-lived products because she won't get money to do it typically, right? You can't get funding to do those types of studies. We're focusing now on mapping out areas where higher levels of radionuclides, which is fission products that are found in marine sediment all around. And think about that word, all around the marine park. It's a marine park, a nuclear wasteland. This is what they do. They turn it into a dumps, and then they call it a park. And they invite you and your loved ones to go out there and get sick and die on top of that. The levels of radiation also pose a threat to local wildlife. There's apparently 450 species of fish that migrate through there, 630 types of mollusks like octopus and cuttlefish, 170 varieties of starfish and sea urchins, and all of it is dangerous to all species and the species themselves. The exact impact of 70 years of radiation on local ecosystems is not yet known to scientists because the industry refused to go there and study it for the last 70 years. We don't know what's positive or negative effects of the radiation will be. Well, of course we do, right? It's a first of its kind study, despite the fact of what they've done to the Bikini Atolls, the French Polynesian Islands, Christmas Island, and many of these incredible paradises. As I'll show you a little bit what I mean. The final phase of the project will be to use these readings in sophisticated modeling by the industry, which is not really going to be sophisticatedly hid results, to see if there's an impact of the marine creatures that live, breathe, and reproduce in the sediment, as they acknowledge the wildlife is also in danger. And if tourists shouldn't be there for more than an hour, it's significant. And this is a study from 2019 on the Bikini Atolls. Radioactive fallout from the nuclear testing contaminated, extending over 1 million square kilometers, and severely impacted the habitability of the affected atolls. So to say there's no precedence is not being completely forward and honest, when this is a 2019 study that shows over 1 million square kilometers of, well, like if this wasn't contaminated, and the French Polynesian Islands, Christmas Island, places like that, weren't contaminated by the nuclear industry, imagine what kind of incredible, unbelievable experience it would be for anybody on this planet. Like, it's hard to wrap your mind around how evil the industry actually is. There's a bill introduced to remove the nuclear energy ban. There's a ban in Australia on nuclear power plants. That doesn't stop them from exporting their dirty bomb uranium worldwide. They're one of the biggest exporters of misery worldwide. Senator Matt Canavan says it's time for Australia. Time for Australia to join the rest of the world in treating nuclear energy as a safe and effective option. It's such a bizarre thing to say, right? To frame it that way. It's such a dishonest way to frame this conversation. That's just the thing about this industry. They can't exist without being prolific lawyers and manipulators. That's how they exist. Their entire existence is predicated upon deception. Australia could soon follow in the footsteps of other leading countries that use nuclear energy as part of their power mix. And after 9 coalition senators backed laws to remove the nation's nuclear energy ban. What's the point of having a ban if the next politicians are just corrupt politicians are able just to waltz in and remove it? you have no future if you allow stuff like that to happen. The Nine Coalition moved to introduce a private senators' bills. They don't work for private. They work for their people in their country. Their job is not to poison the country. The country didn't elect them to go out and do something like this, I can assure you. Arguing nuclear power is one of the safest forms of energy. Well, next time you're in Parliament and you're having this debate, you can call me. You can call me, and I will gladly go on Skype and talk to the Australian Parliament and explain the actual reality of this topic instead of the public relation firms that are going to go in and most likely end up poisoning the population forever, like Montebello Islands. And in fact, Australia, of course, because of what the United Kingdom done there, they waited for the wind to blow across the country before they set off their nuclear weapons. We quantified that many times over the years, by the way. I'm not going to go down that road tonight. I very well might do it one of these days this week, an entire show on this topic of Australia, and which we've done before. A vital role in achieving the nation's emission. So claiming that the emissions from nuclear is the reason that you're going to do this is really disturbing. This was a 2015 Paris Accord. The French, of course, their legacy is horrific. They're the very, very, very last ones that anybody should be following to the grave. Matt Canavan said the mood is shifting on nuclear energy. This is a cliche we've been hearing for about several months since Ukraine. So when Russia originally started to invade, they went into Chernobyl. The whole world freaked out because the world kind of recognizes Chernobyl, not for the real true horror, but they recognize it's a very dangerous scenario. The nuclear industry launched a public relation campaign that is still ongoing to try to repair the damage from the population screeching, "What are you doing at Chernobyl?" Now, they call Australia's unusual legislative ban, which Ireland has the same ban, against nuclear power was moved and debated with less than 30 minutes of debate in the Senate. Yeah, because it wasn't just a single introduction. This was after much debate when the final decisions were made. It was only a 30-second, and it certainly wasn't a debate. Politicians feel the need to explore all energy options for the future. Well, they don't need to remove the ban to explore that option. So, say if you wanted to explore the option on what would happen if murderers didn't ever go to jail, do you think they really need to remove or create a no-go-to-jail option in order to comprehend the significance of not having jail time for mass murderers or murderers? The nuclear industry is by far the biggest murderers, period. Pol Pot and Mao and Stalin, none of these can come close to the nuclear industry. Ban on nuclear energy originated in 1998 when the former Howard government needed to trade it off to get parliamentary support for the construction of a new nuclear reactor for medical purposes. Now, that was the trade-off. The nuclear industry demanded a genocide reactor, which is the radiation that's used in hospitals is a genocide machine, which we cover relentless for many, 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 many years. Senator Canavan says the appetite for nuclear energy has grown since the government signed on to buy nuclear power submarines. We've covered at least 60 or 70% of the stories that they're talking about. Again, this was the pro-nuclear public relation firms. And they're notorious for the constant disinformation and deceit and dishonest reports that we flushed out for many years now. Their entire legacy, their entire history, and their entire argument is predicated upon deceit and deception and dishonesty. People realize, given the geopolitical situation we faced, whatever hang-ups we had on nuclear energy, we needed them in our submarines. The last thing Australia needs is nuclear submarines. Well, when was the last time Australia declared war against a country? Oh, that's right, they've never done it. When was the last... What is the possibility Australia could win a war against another country? Well, that's right, it's zero. When was the last time Australia was used, their military was used by other countries to do evil crimes against humanity? Every single year. Why would Australia need nuclear submarines? They've never tried to quantify that assertion. The people in Australia need energy, not nuclear power plants that'll poison them, surrounded by farms and their dumps, which they want to build in Kimba, is prime farmland. Everything is vented into the community. Now, we're only talking about so-called medical waste from hospitals. It's so toxic, they got to put it in a deep geological repository after they stuck it in your loved ones and murdered them. The excrement from people that are treated by the reactor isotopes that they produce down there are in $1 million lead-lined room, so they don't radiate the people in the hallways and the other rooms. Their excrements go into a separate sewage system which has to be kept on a nuclear waste site, which they don't have. Soccer dad. Trying to sound like a normal, everyday guy, but look at him trying to cut everybody's throat. Chris Bowen says it's the most expensive form of power Australia could invest in by orders of magnitudes. And he said the industry group suggested Australia would need about 80 nuclear plants to produce the electricity it needed. 80. So you can see the incentive for somebody to be paid a lot of money with a suitcase, basically, just to lift the restrictions. And even if they don't get their way, the next government will try their best. Or the next government, if the current one and the next one fails. The industry, once it infiltrates your country, you might as well leave your continent. They're going to destroy it. This is one for every... That is one reactor for every second MP. Put your hand up if you want a reactor. Now, we covered that story last week that they're talking about there. Because that's from last week, those connotations, right? In the past year, other leading countries have embraced nuclear power, with the UK and France. This isn't saying that they're going to use France first, which half their fleet is down from corrosion and corruption. Huge numbers of their reactors are down from droughts, but every 70% of their fresh water in France goes to a nuclear power plant. They need a 1 million gallons a minute, every minute, 1,440 minutes a day. 1.4 billion gallons a day. And like salt water, typically there's 1 billion creatures per glass of salt water. So 1.4 billion times 16 every day of times 1 million creatures each day. So 1.4 billion gallons is a genocide machine. Because you think about each glass of salt water, there's 75 to 100 million of creatures in that are the phytoplankton, the bases of the food chain, the bases of the oxygen chain, the bases of the carbon sequestering chain. The three most important links in your ocean. Not that it matters so much anymore because you killed the planet with Fukushima and 80 years of emissions from fuel pools worldwide. Australia has made it illegal to build baseload coal and gas power stations. And now they want to make it legal. Now they need coal, gas, or oil plants to run a nuclear plant. They need 2 of them dedicated to it, to build it, to run it for its lifespan, and 60 years to decommission it. And it never even comes close to stopping there. We cannot continue to deny our country all reliable power options, including nuclear. Well, that's exactly what you're supposed to do. If you want to protect your country, then you will not have nuclear there. You'll get rid of the nuclear you got. Excuse me. Senator Canavan, who you can't get rid of, said now was the time to open discussion, which they've been having. We cover this every month, the Australian nuclear industry, which is motivated hugely by the Mineral Council in Australia, which are unbelievable pro-nuclear, I might add. But I mean, their exports are only about $500 million a year. It's not a make-or-break industry for Australia. You see what I'm saying? It's disease factories is what a nuclear power plant. The fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation in your community. When they had the commission a few years ago, in 2016 I think it was, they took 300 people who didn't know anything about nuclear. They fed them the public relation firms, the apologists for the nuclear industry propaganda, and they still voted no. You don't need to make it legal to have a discussion. It's an absurd, it's a ridiculous, it's an outrageous lie to suggest that you got to remove the ban to have a discussion. It's such a dishonest and deceitful and deceptive assertion. The nuclear ban may cause decades of pain if we continue to deny our country disease factories. Research has shown nuclear power results in fewer deaths than, get a load of this, dam failures, oil rig explosions, and incidences where people fall from installing solar panels. This is their evidence. I've actually never heard that combination before in all the years we've been doing this. To call nuclear despicable is barely scratching the surface. Hard cases. Let me see here. How do we approach this? It's going to take me maybe 2 months to get 2 months to get my computer archives back up to cruising speed, folks. And the last, since Friday, I've been unbelievable sick with the flu, and I was doing pretty good today. I'm miserable tonight. Congenital heart disease operations rose 14.2% after Fukushima in Japan. It was a 14.2% increase in the number of operations per 100,000 live births for complex congenital heart diseases in neonates and infants. It's actually 14,200. It's a catastrophic number. So they're claiming that nuclear has no issue, but I just showed that issue. That's a catastrophic issue, by the way. Here's another one you might want to think about. Extreme increase in mortality caused by cardiac diseases. The death rates might give the creeps to some people. This is in Japan in a single place. An extra 12.5%, 12,700 people in a single month died of heart attacks, an excess, abnormality in the nuclear wasteland. I mean, like to suggest that nuclear has no issues, you might want to consider 50 becquerels a kilogram irreversible heart damage for children. And it's pretty easy to have that happen. Let me find a couple more. We got so much evil, we can't spend a lot of time on this subject. I'm probably going to have to dedicate an entire show just to this topic. Radiation health specialist, children with over 11 becquerels a kilogram start to see heart problems. The fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment 24 hours a day. They're still splitting the atoms. Long after they shut down the plant, those fuel pools are still hemorrhaging radiation. If they built 80 reactors in Australia, for instance, each reactor has 2 fuel pools. It has to go into a fuel pool for a couple of decades minimum for it to cool down. The reason it's hot is because it's splitting physical atoms. That if you collected the atoms, which is a perpetual machine, see? It's an actual perpetual machine now. Once it goes through the chain reaction, it'll create atoms for millions of years. This is when I say the word disease factors, this is what I'm talking about. And there's 1,800 illnesses and injuries and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. There's heart problems, liver problems, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. The list goes on and on and on. Research has shown nuclear power results in fewer deaths than dam failures, oil rig explosions, and people falling from installing solar panels. Leave it to Australia to come up with something that actual bizarre as a argument. That's their argument? Which we've heard all of these separately, but never in a string like that. I've always said Australia and Britain are, by the government apologists and people like that for the nuclear industry are by far, and because don't get me wrong, the rest of the countries are despicable, but the Australian and Britain takes it to a whole different level of scum. It's surreal that I'm talking about this tonight. It's surreal that they would say anything like that. They can't quantify any of those assertions under any circumstances. We can destroy their narratives. We're probably going to have to. Across the globe, nuclear power produces double electricity that is solar and wind. Double that is solar and wind. I guess here we go, but double that is solar and wind. I'm not going to go way down that road. We'll just take it from Snyder, the expert, who does a synopsis each year for many decades. There was a net nuclear capacity in 2020 of 0.4 gigawatts for nuclear, 0.4, less than half a large nuclear reactor. Renewables added 248 gigawatts. The revised was 260, right? Which was equal to 300 nuclear power plants worth of renewables in a 12-month period. Last year, 2021, was 291 gigawatts, which is equal to 333 large nuclear power plants worth of renewables came online. Australia is probably the best spot on the planet for renewables on top of this. And we talk about this every time we talk about Australia, because you can read between the lines. We've said it many, many times over the years. Somewhere in the next few years, they're gonna go all out to try to remove the restrictions, the ban in Australia from 1998. Right, so the claim across the globe, nuclear power produces double electricity. The synopsis says between 2020 and 2026 that renewables will produce 4,800 gigawatts, which is equal to all nuclear, all oil, gas, and coal combined worldwide. Will come online in just 6 months. Do you think that renaissance is going to end in 6 years? Or do you think it's actually that's the beginning of the all-out? I mean, that's on its own is replacing all emissions on the planet in just 6 years. So to come out and suggest that wind and solar and renewables don't have any redeeming qualities is not dishonest, it's criminal. Senator Canavan said Australia must follow suit and support nuclear energy as an energy means of the future, and that the world is turning back to nuclear power, which is just the nuclear public relation firms panicking in the last 7 months. And there are it's posturing really, right? But this is scary that Australia is headed in that direction. How can you have a future if you won't start? Because they won't even try to have a future. They want to go backwards and poison their country worse than what the United Kingdom done. Which is, at the 80 nuclear power plants, they'll supersede it pretty quickly. They can't control the tritium emissions on top of that. Now, this man-made anthropogenic emissions, according to the EPA, are 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison once it's gone through a chain reaction. So the emissions from the fuel pools are 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. But the problem with the mixed oxide fuel is it's a billion times more toxic than that stuff. So it's a billion times more toxic than 2 billion times more toxic than industrial fuel. To call them dishonest would, like, if they made a mistake, but this is not a mistake. This is bald-faced lies to sell something that is extremely harmful, and that all of Australia should be humiliated that they have anybody in the industry and the government is willing to go that route, this deceitful and dishonest and disingenuous. Because that's what this is. This is a completely dishonest narrative we're talking about. With the world's largest uranium reserves, Australia cannot afford to be left out of the global nuclear progress. There is no progress. It's 2020 there was 5 reactors came online and 6 went offline. The last 2 reactors came online in America. We're at Watts Bar. The first one was 24 years to complete it. The other one was 44 years before they finally got up and running. So by the time they got up and running, it was already decrepit. It was already too dangerous. It's built on obsolete technology. And once you go through a cycle and take fuel out of the reactor and put it in a pool, every time you open a reactor up, you're releasing these emissions. This is why you bring in 1,000 plus external workers, because they're not going to register for illnesses and diseases because they're temporary workers. The mission targets highlight that wind and solar will not get us to net zero and will send us broke trying, he said. And I just showed you that last year was 333 nuclear power plants where the renewables came online in just 12 months. And the year before was 300. So that's 633 nuclear power plants. There's only 440 plants worldwide. Not all of them are operating. So Renewables cold-cocked the nuclear industry in less than 24 months. Senator Jacinta Price said Australia needs to fully support nuclear power to achieve its ambitious emission goals and targets. If we truly, as a nation, want the cleanest, most reliable energy source there is available, the nuclear power is the logical option. So Australia has a serious problem. It's called senators like this that are trying to cut the throats of all Australians permanently. And Lewis Allen is a recent graduate. Gets out of university with his journalist degree, and one of his first articles is cutting everybody's throat. He has keen interest in mining, aka cutting everybody's throat with nuclear. The art of UK nuclear testing, 70 years on. This was another story that happened to show up too. And I bet you they weren't even aware of the other 2 stories we just covered. Way to go, Australia. I apologize. I got the flu, but we're doing the show anyway, because if we don't, then nobody will challenge these false assertions. This particular story is going to give you a dose of facts. Maralinga Banner is this right there, Maralinga, which is Australia. On October the 3rd, 1952, the UK conducted the first nuclear test in Australia. And now, 70 years later, they have the highest cancer rates per 100,000 people worldwide. Cancer is not the only thing that happens from radiation poisoning. Yeah, I've been holy shit sick today too. Yeah, I hear you, absolutely. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Yeah, why is nobody watching my show tonight? Why is there only 20 people in my show tonight? Like this particular topic that we do, it's the people that watch these kind of shows, they're hardcore, and we're censored extraordinary since last year. It was huge censorship. They took down my main site last year when we were looking for spiders because they're missing due to radioactive fallout from Fukushima. Yeah, thank you, folks. Let me see what we got going on here. How's the poll going tonight? Let's check the poll. Should Prime Minister Boris Johnson be arrested for lifting the radioactive Fukushima food ban in the United Kingdom? 96% of the people said, yep, hell yeah. Let me keep her going here. There are rural areas that the UK government in the 1950s regarded as unpopulated, despite the presence of the Aboriginal people. And the exposure to the atomic testing and the subsequent contamination of their country. A total of 7 atomic devices were tested by the British, with Australian government approval and logistical support from 1956 to 57 in Maralinga, accompanied by over 500 so-called minor tests. And these I alluded to earlier it was actually 700 that we covered many years now. Conventional, these were dirty bombs where they took fission, which is plutonium, is all fission, and wrapped it in conventional explosives and just detonated it in random places throughout Australia. It's evil. What they done, there's no other way to describe it. Just like Boris Johnson lifting the food ban from a nuclear wasteland, your corruption is complete in the government. It's absolutely complete. Like for key positions. The colonial nature of the relationship between the United Kingdom and Australia meant that Australian Prime Minister Menzies accepted the opportunity to host the atomic test from the United Kingdom with hapless ardor and relinquished any control over how and when they were to be conducted, and that the Australian public was given no information about the test, which offered no benefit or reward to the Australians. In fact, they have the highest cancer rates, and cancer is just one of 1,800 illnesses from radiation. A permanent radioactive contamination of the land itself. The contaminants will be there long after all the humans are gone. And dangerous is what I mean by that. Speaking on ABC Radio in 2011, he said, I was a kid. I got up early in the morning about 7 a.m. playing with a homemade toy, and we heard the big bomb went off that morning, a loud noise, and the ground shook. And I don't know how long after, we seen this quiet black smoke, oily and shiny, coming across from the smoke, which is a huge plume, obviously. Because typically you can't see it or smell it or hear it or taste it or touch it or feel it. Next time we had sore eyes, skin rash, diarrhea, and vomiting everywhere. And old people too, which is significant poisoning we're talking about. Along with the Maralinga veterans, Avon, Alpha Victor, Oscar, November, Hudson, Yami was responsible for the formation of a royal commission in the 1980s, where the British threw a few $100 million or less than $100 million at the Australians and told them to get lost. And the Australian government said, thanks, have a nice day. And the atomic crimes of the British government and the spinelessness. The last nuclear weapons test above ground took place in 1980, and the last underground explosion in 2017. The underground explosions all cracked the earth and vents. And then every time it rains, of course, you ended up making sure it's going to end up in the water tables. Nuclear threat discovered off the coastline 70 miles. They're basically, that last story, they're talking about Maralinga, but they're talking about other, obviously, right? They're not going into detail on Emu or the 700 dirty bombs or Montebello. And so that story basically, coincidentally, came out the same as this story on the same day. And coincidentally, the same day that the politicians come out and decide to make a case was these two particular stories came out. They picked the worst week on the planet to make their case. There is no opposition. There will be zero opposition to this. And so what we've done here tonight is the only narrative that will exist that says, hey, wait a second. There won't be a single media, a single journalist, a single academic on the entire planet of any discipline that will come out and challenge these false assertions. Not one. That is a frightening, an unbelievable frightening statement. That's a horrific, hideous statement, folks. I can't believe I made it this far. I'm not going to make it much further. What I'm going to have to do, because this story is going to show up all over the place this week, right? Because I have a huge amount on Australia in folders and documentations and academic studies. I must have 600 studies on Maralinga and Montebello alone. Actual studies. Australia should fly me in there, and we'll have a debate for the first time in human history. And the nuclear industry is not going to win. Period. Not even close to it. In fact, if they'd done something like that, the industry would withdraw. Yeah. A company was fined $120,000 after poisoning one of their employees with illegal levels of radiation. Alliance Medical Radio Pharmacy. Like, radiation is not a medicinal application. I've done entire presentations with academic studies. When you radiate somebody with radiation in a hospital setting, you destroy all the other organs. New misguided interpretation of the greenhouse effect. I got to go down the rabbit hole on this particular story. A new wave of climate change denial and misrepresentation of science. That's a key story in this equation of the cover story is right there, folks. I'm not going to do it tonight, but we are at some point going to cover it. 25,000 Ukrainian children made ill by Chernobyl treated in Cuba. We covered similar stories to this over the years. Because there's pre-Chernobyl, pre-Ukraine-Russia conflict, there was just dozens and dozens of orphanages in Belarus and Ukraine, probably still there, no doubt, that are full of disfigured children that have been abandoned because of debilitating diseases and malformations from congenital malformation that weren't corrected at or attempted to correct at birth. There was quite a few doctors that have dedicated a significant proportion of their lives in doing these surgeries, and still ongoing in Ukraine and Belarus, and which is not the only ones. Like we see, Chernobyl poisoned heavily Europe. They closed 9,000 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom. Wrap your mind around that statement. They closed 9,000 farms. 400 are still closed today. The rest of them should never have been opened. It was actually 9,400 farms. Sweden closed the freshwater lakes for fishing for 30 years after Chernobyl. But studies were showing, multiple studies on the sex ratio of males and females, because radioactive pollution emissions have this unique thing where they change the sex ratio for more males than females, which of course means less population. But you can't just do that to the entire population of Europe without doing the same thing to the species. This is crimes against humanity at its peak, at its worst by far. This is unacceptable. This is not tenable. This story, this was a public relation firm, pro-nuclear. Truth about the FDA import alert 9933 on the Japanese food, which was in place till September 2021. And Europe at the same time lifted their restrictions as the Americans did. Without the country's media reporting on it. It lifted all restrictions of 14 prefectures that were in place for a decade. A week ago, now this is an older one that keeps showing up, but it's true, it did happen, but they lifted the restrictions in 2021, a decade later. Not because it was safe, but because the nuclear industry had co-opted those positions in government that regulated it, the non-regulatory agencies. Baby powder, baby milk powder, and others. Baby products. The reason is radionuclide contamination. Japan finally admitted its inability to control Fukushima daily discharges of millions of tons of radioactive wastewater into the Pacific has caused many people to suffer from cancer, and so they categorically try to deny it. Another example of fake news. No. We cover this all the time. It's not fake news. By the Chinese 50-cent army. China allegedly has 350,000 keyboard warriors funded by the government agencies to scare people into boycotting Japan and Japanese food. Well, China bans the food. China doesn't need to scare them. China bans the food. They're trying to scare them into eating it because it's very harmful on a permanent basis. The FDA import alert did not ban the import of Japanese food products, as the viral post claimed. Yeah, it did, until 2021. It only targeted Japan's own restrictions. That's right. Using sections of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And on September 21st, 2022, the U.S. FDA deactivated, canceled the import alert. So it was true. Just because they lifted the restrictions don't mean it's safe. It just means the nuclear industry took 10 years to get to that position, to co-opt the chain Since then, there has been no ban on any food products from the 5 affected prefectures. It was banned in 14 prefectures. And that was the headlines, by the way, in 2021 last year, and we covered it. It was also Chiba, which is right alongside of Tokyo. It was all 14 prefectures, and I showed you the depictions of that actually at the beginning, right? From the 5 affected prefectures, which is dishonest. Fact number 6, Japan did not supply contaminated food to tourists. Yes, they did. Right? We covered the stories, particularly about the rice grown in the nuclear wasteland, was sold as domestic rice. It was mostly sold to hotel chains and hotels and restaurants, which is where the tourists are going to eat. Because most hotels don't have cooking suites, right? So they're going to be eating at the restaurants. And the chain 7-Eleven type supermarkets. And repeatedly promoted by the Chinese 50-cent army. Japan did not reserve their contaminated food supply for consumption by tourists. Well, it was banned by 55 countries for a decade straight. In 14 prefectures, not 5. Canada lifted all restrictions after 93 days, and which meant that Japan couldn't ship it anywhere, only Canada. And this is why everybody in Canada is got some kind of illness, because they're being poisoned through bioaccumulation from their supermarkets. It's the biggest breach of academic integrity in human history, and it's a catastrophic breach. Those are lies created by the Wu Mao to scare the Chinese. You don't need to scare the Chinese. China banned it. It's still banned in China. Fact number 7, Fukushima radiation only affected a small area of Japan. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident did not affect 70% of Japanese territory. That's an incredible statement right on its own, right? They're acknowledging 30% of Japan is radioactive from the nuclear meltdown, which is extraordinary, really, that they actually admit to that. So 30% means it's not at Tokyo, is what they're suggesting by that, see? Let's just go challenge that right quick. You can't do nothing quick around here because it's a dangerous conversation. You just and I have a way of rebuting these narratives, so just bear with me. I'll just give you some examples. Yeah, stunning, eh? It's way past Tokyo. So let me just move. I want to show you some numbers from across Japan, right? So you can make your own assertions because I'm going to provide you with the documentation. Almost there. And let's just, I hate not providing enough documentation to I got a tendency, because it's appropriate, to provide an excess amount of documentation. Because you might say, well, you can argue with this one or argue with that one, but you can't argue with an absurd amount of documentation. Tokyo area turned out to be as contaminated as Fukushima, which is 220 kilometers away. Air samples in Tokyo were 270 times. 270 times just the air. Hello. Oh, we got Tokyo. That's the guy who threatened to rape me, eh? From Japan. Remember those, for people who've been around a long. He used to call into the show 10, 15 times at a time, each show. Air samples in Tokyo, 270 times more contaminated with cesium. Do you think that's going to go away? Do you think that's going to go away? So the air samples are 270 times more contaminated than global weapons fallout peak. The simulation of the Krypton 85, Superman stuff, you know, the Hulk and Spider-Man. Reactor number 3 with mixed oxide fuel exploded on the 14th. 300,000 becquerels a square meter radioactive iodine in Tokyo before the end of March. These are catastrophic numbers. Of course, Tokyo with 29 million becquerels per square meter. Now, he wants to claim there's none of this exists. That's why he's doing this, is to distract you. And here, I'll deal with that now. $29 million becquerels a square meter in the soil. That ain't going away ever. You're not supposed to be in Tokyo. You know, Tokyo drinking water unsafe. If it's unsafe for infants, it's unsafe for everybody else. And pets are like infants, they're small, right? For instance, you know, and your children, it's not just infants, it's going to be children. Like, if it's dangerous for any size of a human, it's dangerous for all. Because it's bioaccumulation. And by the way, they didn't start modeling the radiation from multiple nuclear meltdowns we've never seen before in human history until 21 days after. So the original 21 days of radiation emissions were never put into the equation. 70% of Japan's territory is polluted. Not 30%, but 70%. So it's 100%. Because they can't get rid of the sewage because it's too radioactive. Think about that statement. Can't get rid of the garbage because it's too radioactive. The ash is from the incinerator is too radioactive. And on top of that, they're grinding up radioactive contaminated waste in Fukushima Prefecture, shipping it across the country and incinerating it. These are dirty bombs on a whole different scale. Tokyo contaminated with highly toxic radiation. Experts worry about catastrophic impact on health. And I showed you earlier, 14,200 neonates and infants need open heart surgery per 100,000. But that's across the entire country, not just Tokyo. Neutron rays were measured in Tokyo, folks. Uranium-235 found in Chiba. And like my Geiger counter up there in the corner is counts per minute. It can't find uranium-235. It can't find neutrons. So when you see, like there's 180, 200 counts per minute is an evacuation zone pre-Fukushima at a nuke plant. You would have to evacuate the nuke site. I should be evacuating the studio. High levels of strontium-90, 250 kilometers from the meltdowns. West of Tokyo, 24,000 becquerels a kilogram radioactive cesium in the soil samples, 250 kilometers from Fukushima. Strontium found in 2,200 locations. For every strontium, or cesium rather, there's around 100 times more strontium-90. And strontium-90 is just one of the many strontium daughters. Now, 300 times more radiation released into the atmosphere from burning debris than the government claimed. And their numbers are terrifying. So when you multiply it by 300, it's a unmitigated war against humanity. Iodine-131 levels rise 350 kilometers from Fukushima to sewage plants. So let's talk about this for a second. There's 10 times more iodine-132 for every iodine-131 produced. There's 30 times more iodine-133 for every iodine-131 produced. There's 31 times more iodine-129 with a 15 million year half-life, with the same emissions basically as tritium. It's a very harmful emitter, but it's so plentiful. In Canada, out of Ottawa, the study showed 220 million atoms per litre and 20 million atoms per litre of iodine-131. But the 132 to 133 iodines, which is just a fraction, that's going to be in that sample, by the way. The 132, 133 is 9 times more effective at ionizing and radiating the thyroid glands of animals and birds and insects and marine life and humans than the 131 is. And the 131 is extremely effective. And when you're talking about these kind of numbers, you're talking about saturating the thyroid glands of all the species and the humans on a continent scales. And what that means, though, is the thyroid is making radioactive hormones, because that's what your thyroid does, right? It normally takes the natural, harmless, stupid, everyday background elements and turn it into a radioactive, like iodine, of course, and turn it into a hormone, and then your pituitary gland, for instance, stores these hormones. And your pituitary gland is in your brain detoxing. Now, nobody really knows the whole story on the pituitary gland outside of the fact that if it's storing the hormones, obviously it's a regulatory in your body for hormones. And if you're going to store radioactive hormones. And there's around 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and illnesses. So let me go back to that one. So you can't get rid of the sewage. You can't get rid of the garbage, the ash from the incinerators. You can't get rid of the scariest imaginable, of course, is sewage, which implies that you're excreting absurd. And we're talking about absurd numbers per kilogram, by the way. But also the water reclamation facilities in the communities can't get rid of the sediment from the water filtration systems. And like you're talking about, there's this one community made it into the paper. They wanted TEPCO to take the sediment because they had 50,000 one-ton bags of radioactive sediment from the water reclamation center, which meant you were supposed to evacuate the town. Because that these kind of numbers mean you're radiating the water pipes in everybody's homes, but because you're cooking, it means all your pots and pans and forks and knives and dishes too, because you're going to wash them in that same water, are going to be contaminated. And then you're going to get showers, and when you're going to absorb liters of this radioactive water that way, or worse, bats. And that, and let me throw that out there as a sideline for everybody. If you're trying to lose some weight, take very hot baths, because you can lose huge poundage by taking hot baths and sweating it out of you, right? That's how professionals actually do it. I don't say do it constantly all day, every day for a week. If you do it a couple of times a week, you will notice a huge difference in your any excess weight. Fukushima radioactivity over 40 billion becquerels a kilogram, large black puddles of fallout on the roadside. from the inside the failed fuel rods. So talking about fuel particulates, Fukushima radiation only affected a small area of Japan. We did not affect 70% of the territory. I showed you unequivocally it affected not only 7% of the territory, let me show you how that actually works. Like, you know, it's such a difficult subject, and I'm really good at this subject, nuclear, but it's still a very difficult subject, and even for me to tell, because there's so many facets, there's so many, there's so many minutiae of the minutiae of the minutiae, the details of the details of the details, that I can't cover, constantly. I can't because it's very time consuming. You can't do what I'm doing unless you're dedicated to it, and it's a very difficult thing to dedicate your life to something like this. And we do that because I feel, I understand and I'm able to quantify that we don't have anybody else out there, unfortunately, providing the documentation. Here's a model of Japan's fallout after 20 days. So just think of, this is 20 days. Now, this is a continuous plume. This is not like a bomb went off and picked up 1 million tons and atomized an aerosol, and ionized and radiated it, and which is horrifying amount we're talking about, because when you get into atoms, a single atom can cause a autoimmune trigger, but your body doesn't have a defense for it, so it floods it for the rest of your life with white blood cells, or insects, or animals, or birds. This plume is just the first 20 days, that particular model. Let me see if I can find, I know I can find it. Here's France's model. And think about this. This is pulsing energy every second. And it's going to kill the bacteria and the fungus in your forest. So this is why you're seeing your forest fires are so intense, because you don't have bacteria breaking down the litter and the foliage in your forest anymore, which is a phenomenon that was shown after Chernobyl. This is France's model based on 16 days of radioactive fallout. Just because the model stopped, the plume doesn't just give up the ghost and disappear. It doesn't turn to fairy dust. That plume still exists. If you go look at my research, the expeditions for 6 years to Alaska, doing species counts, it wiped out the species in British Columbia coastline, Canada. We're talking catastrophic. So if you go to my website and you scroll down, you'll see before and after pictures of the coastline. If that doesn't worry you, then come back and watch the video again. It must be your first time. You'll get there. So this model, that's the Pacific. Let me come over and show it to you. Hello. Why is half my arm missing? Where's my other half of my arm? There it is. So this is the Pacific Ocean. We've done research expeditions from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska year after year, multiple times. One year we've done it 4 times. This is the Atlantic Ocean, for instance. These continents were all hammered by, this is just, the best way to say it is this is just the first 16 days of a never-ending war against the species. This is an all-out war against the species worldwide is what we're looking at. This is not an accident. They built it on a fault line in an earthquake zone. There's no way they didn't know this was going to happen. Unfortunately, I had the flu since Friday, and I actually took painkillers about an hour before I went live tonight. I couldn't take it anymore. I had the headaches. But I can't handle missing a day, because the industry, that's like giving the industry a pass for 24 hours. It's not acceptable. We generally, what we try to do is cover the 24-hour news cycle of nuclear. And Fukushima, of course, the biggest catastrophic event. Probably, like when everybody worldwide gets sick, then the truth will come out about Fukushima, because that's happening right now as we speak. Global warming is Fukushima, but it's the nuclear industry. It's that legacy of the nuclear industry. I got no idea what just happened. Here we go. We're not going to get through all the shows. The documentation got picked out tonight. My apologies to everybody. So they showed these maps showing only a small part of Japan was affected, but they refused to acknowledge these models, right? This is France. This is the Norwegian Institute for Air Research. And United Kingdom pension titan vows to back nuclear power renaissance. The Renaissance, if they were to throw everything they got at it, every nickel and dime that the nuclear industry could ever use at it, there still can't be a nuclear renaissance, because by 2026, the renewable industry will have curb-stomped the nuclear industry, which is just less than 4 years away. We're going to see 4,800 gigawatts of new energy come online. 4,800. Okay. Let's close the poll down. Should Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris the Monster Johnson, be arrested for lifting the radioactive Fukushima food ban in the United Kingdom? This is a no-brainer. And so should the people in Australia who lifted the food ban, by the way, and Canada and other countries. But Australia had done it earlier than most countries. Canada was the first for many, many years, and only. So they shipped all their poison, the worst of the worst poison food. That's why everybody in Canada is currently sick. The cover stories are very many. And for humans, it was the coronavirus, and for the species, it's the bird flu and avian flu. Is part of the cover story. And this clumsy cover story, and it's disgusting that we have been betrayed on the only planet we got like this. Should the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, because you can only put so many digits there, right, 100 or something, for lifting a radioactive Fukushima ban in the United Kingdom. It's so easy to make the case that he should be get the death penalty. I don't think Britain has the death penalty. They should bring it back, and it should be, for people like this, you should be burned at the stake alive as an incentive for other people in the nuclear genocide, omnicide industry as a deterrent. And we made it this far. I shouldn't push my luck, I suppose. So we're going to close that poll down and say goodnight. I'm not going to do shout out because I can. My throat is just raw. So we'll end that poll. Thank you, everybody. I'll read the comments after. Good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Get some outro. Some ninth sympathy. Can't even talk anymore. So my throat is just shot here right now. Hugs for everybody. God bless you, everybody. We'll see everybody hopefully tomorrow night. This Australian story is not gone. This is not a one-off. We're going to be covering that again tomorrow night, unfortunately, horrifically, or fortunately, right? Try to educate those who are seeking the truth. Let me see here. Yeah, we'll call it a night. And by the way, this was a great example tonight. For anybody that's new to this, you should download this particular episode. It's a very... Because usually, like, when you can't do a lot of talking. You're more to the point a lot of the times. But I usually bring in an overwhelming amount of documentation. Good night, everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. There's not going to be no show on Wednesday. And we'll be back on Thursday. I'll see everybody tomorrow night. You have a great night, folks. And we ordered the part for the boat today. So thank God we raised the money. On the weekend, that got chewed up, which is, who cares? We're getting the part, right? And I think we're going to have it around the 15th or something, which is the fuel pump for the motor, and get back on the water and do some research. Take care, folks. And again, thanks to everybody that donated. James, Lucid and Obsolete on the weekend, because otherwise we wouldn't have the fuel pump, right? Good night, everybody. Take care.